green movement and also art event that kind of accentuate the movement a little bit. So I just like to open up so that they could introduce themselves, what they do, and it's very informal. I don't have a structure. They could tell you what their upcoming program is, or you think they want to share something, feel free to pass around leaflet and whatever things that you wanted to kind of contribute or to network. So let's start with
I'm Andy Gardner. So I guess I sort of found myself in this world when I moved to Bushwick and started transforming these 3 backyards. It's about 3,000 square feet into a sort of native plant and insect habitat, and also a small farm and composting site. So I started by taking tons of food waste into the street from local restaurants and in large bags and carried them through the bulkhead and into the basement and out to the backyard. At the height of it, I was composting about 500 pounds of food waste a month. And it sort of slowed down as the summer. And I don't know, I'd say like, I make paintings using compost. I lay a canvas down and sort of create a scenario where lots of insects and microbes and fungus can act upon the surface of the canvas, and the acids and leachate from the compost pile sort of creates this work on paper or canvas. Also, I work in the Bronx with Learn to Grow and Eat It. It's a program where we employ 15 high school kids to grow food, sell it at a farmer's market, and teach like second graders about gardening and the environment in the city. So that's a project of Grow NYC. I worked for them for 2 years, and so I've also been building rainwater collecting systems in community gardens to manage, CSO, to prevent water from going in the sewer and cause pollution in rivers. I don't know, any of those things, just a handful of things. Thank you.
and Aki.
My name is Aki here at the Baker, and we have a project called Adopt a Farm Box. Adopt a Farm Box started out of a couple of different things. I had previously, or still have, this organizational group of people called the Compound Brooklyn. What we do is we strive to give for the sake of giving, instead of giving looking for something in return. And by giving, you kind of create this nice network of people where you would come together because you want to come together and you want to do things together and you want to do things for others. And then I also have a company called Baker Design Build, which is a sustainable design construction company. And we combined those two and created Adopt a Farm Box. That's how it started. So what we do is we are building boxes where people can farm it. And we donate it to local organizations and local schools where they have a type of commitment and need for health education, reconnecting with food, and I think it's basically we really want people to get connected with food. And through food into the sustainability and into their health. So that's our aim, and we started in May, and we have about 4 schools now that we're going to be implementing this in September. So that's what we are doing.
I'm Derek Dankbot, and I'm really excited to be here. It's an amazing show, Jonah. It's really incredible, and this installation that you've done, Tattfoo, is super inspiring. I'm always inspired by your work, and I'm humbled by the idea that I should talk about mine in the context of all this amazing productivity that's the sort of the source of power behind Tattfoo's work, is that everybody agrees that greening the city and growing food in the city is really exciting and a good thing. And so from that, I created a blog called The Greenest to kind of explore what the best ways were to mature that sensibility into both in terms of investment from a business standpoint, because that interests me, but also in terms of community involvement. And from that came another project, a curatorial project that I'm working on called Farm City, which is exploring ways to both celebrate and enlarge the connections between people doing this work in urban agriculture. And that's where I met up with Tattfoo's work and many of the people here who I know. And we're putting together a series of events in the fall that will try to give people multiple points of engagement to explore what's happening in urban agriculture, starting with a fair, which is a kind of meditation on the hyper-local, if you will, where it'll be like a county fair, but where everything is grown and made in Brooklyn. This is not a place people think of as being particularly robust agricultural community, but we're going to kind of turn the farmer's market on its head and show that there is that productivity there as a meditation to get people to think about what the future could be, what a greener future could be. And I have more information about the other events in that project, but that's the basic thrust of where I'm coming from.
Hi, I am Daniel, and I think because the subtitle of this event is about Asian artists doing non-Asian art, something like that. So I started composting when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the Philippines, and I went as far as to put in a composting toilet in the hut that I lived in. It had urine diversion. It was a wonderful system. It used rice hulls that would otherwise be burned to expedite the composting. And I really thought that people in my neighborhood would get excited about that. And want to know how they could do their own composting toilet, but instead people just called me Bawang, which means crazy, and they said, why do you want a 19th century toilet when we know that in America you've already gotten to the point where you have flush toilets. And it really occurred to me that they knew that from movies and just from whatever popular culture that we were exporting. And I had kind of gone to the Philippines thinking, all right, I'll stay there for maybe my whole life. But I kind of started to get to thinking that if America was exporting better examples, then it may actually have a bigger net benefit for the Philippines or just anywhere. So I came back here and worked on a few projects and green roofs in the Bronx, and then somehow got in my head this idea that we should have a president, whoever was going to live in the White House in 2009 should have a vegetable garden there. And started campaigning for that. Started off with an upside-down school bus with a garden, a vegetable garden on the roof, kind of similar to those things over there. It was a way to catch people's attention, to talk about gardening, draw them in to a place where they may not have even thought of it. And like you said, that it was not a very controversial ask, because people, whether they liked it because it would be engaging school kids with some sort of hands-on education, or whether they liked the petition because it was a petition that would ultimately, a garden would feed homeless people or food pantries. People liked it from that angle. It worked, and I think that Michelle Obama decided that she wanted to plant a vegetable garden at the White House before I was even born, basically. And she would have done it anyway. So I think we helped to make sure that she knew that this was something that the American people were waiting for, because it did generate some good press, mainly because it was an upside-down school bus. But so in 2008, I had some conversations with people in Mayor Bloomberg's office, talking about this, seeing what their experience was, what they thought would be politically viable, and I did say how cool it would be to have a garden in front of City Hall. And I was told, you know, it's a little bit risky, it's sort of avant-garde, and you know, come back after you get a garden at the White House kind of thing in a joking way. And so after that happened, and I came back to New York, one thing that I really thought would happen that didn't quite happen is I thought that a garden in front of City Hall would just manifest because of the multiple benefits that we started seeing with Michelle Obama once she discovered how powerful a garden could be and how it could engage youth and different staff at the White House and foreign dignitaries, etc. But that didn't happen right away. So I launched a petition here called People's Garden NYC, and so far it's at the stage where 5,000 people have signed this petition, and we have a nice rendering, but we don't have a garden yet. The administration hasn't said no, they just haven't said yes yet. And so if any of you want to, has anybody here signed this petition or heard about it? Well, yeah, but
Sign it online.
yeah, but I'll pass it around if that's okay with you. And you know, I really do think that the more people who sign it, the more people the mayor knows are waiting for this to happen, the sooner it will come to fruition.
Did they mention or ask you if there was some kind of security risk or something, or the people that would be tending the garden? Did that ever come up from them as a reason why they were not interested in doing it, or?
Yeah.
Wait, in the White House or in
No,
the...
in Bloomberg, in front of City Hall.
No, if you've ever been to City Hall, it's one of the most secure,
Right.
you know, it has
Exactly.
24/7 guard booths, and you have to go through an airport security style thing with conveyor belts and everything. So I mean, I think people bring it up a lot, but the reality is that it's one of the safest places to garden in the world, and that whoever's manning the booth, the NYPD, you know, just like the White House and Secret Service has managed to keep a garden safe and still let people use shovels and other sharp objects and have bees, that the same thing, it can work very well here too.
The building behind City Hall, there is a garden there. Already, a few plots of land has been planted with vegetables and stuff. I'm not sure is that part of City Hall or another building.
Yeah, that is part of City Hall Park,
Right,
but
yeah.
it's adjacent to Tweed Courthouse. And
Yeah,
there's
I
a
think so.
school in the basement of Tweed. They've gone away on vacation for the summer, so I got permission to help water it because that wasn't what the petition was for. But you know, I don't want the people who work in Department of Education and in the mayor's office who pass by there every day to start to see a garden that's dying and that be their frame of reference for what a garden looks like. So you know, it wasn't really part of the plan, but since this garden showed up in March or April, and we planted some strawberries there the other day. It's not ideal. There's a lot of shade there, and the water access is scarce. It's if you go there, you can see the irrigation system. Sometimes the sprinkler will come on, and it sprinkles in front of the garden and behind the garden, but it doesn't quite hit those boxes.
I just want to mention that me and the rest of the panels sort of have a network, and we share things and we kind of work together, and that is encouraged, you know, because it's also like plants, you know, the network and rhyme zone actually makes the whole movement stronger. And I just want to mention that Derek's curatorial project from City that I will be part of, I'll be biking in my new cargo bike with sustainable tools and technologies in front. And Andrew's going to do another art project there where he will use compost and make drawings and things like that. And Aki is going to work with me also in a project in school called Green Hill School Improvement. She's going to teach kids about plantings and food. stuff like that. Now please feel free to have questions and conversation.
I have
And
flyers by the way about
Yeah.
Farm City for everybody. So
Can I do that too? I have flyers about.
perfect, let's go with that way.
I think that's the one.
see that's
And I actually have 3 seed packs too.
I had a question for you guys. You guys all seem to have such a focus on urban farming, and I think it's really interesting. But I'm curious as to why you've all chosen this as like your environmental cause, because I understand that there's this idea that it helps people re-engage with nature that you don't have people doing in an urban setting where we're really detached from the food chain and everything else. But I'm curious as to why you would choose that as opposed to, I don't know, something else like making people stop using toxic products or things that might have bigger implications on like a larger scale, when it seems like, urban areas are actually really small, and there's so many people concentrated in them. Like, how much impact does, 1 acre of land have versus, something that could potentially be polluting such a large area?
well, I have an answer because I've thought about that a lot. Everyone here has thought about that a lot. That's why we're here. I had worked in green buildings before, and that was my passion for many years, and I had some successes there, and it was really exciting. But after having done it for 10 years, I began to see that the impact that I had by doing that was fairly minimal. Number of times somebody used the building or bought something in a building or rented something, the transactions were minimal, but food people eat every day. And so if you want to engage them in environmental consciousness, it is the most immediate impact, both on their sense of what's important, and you can reach them in terms of understanding it, and then also food also has a hugely outsized impact environmentally compared to other issues, like the amount of energy used to create food in the United States is varying estimates, but it's thought to be 40% of the petrochemicals that we use are used in the production of food, and the fertilizer, the transportation, the farm machines. So to change our nature, our relationship to food, to localize it, isn't just about flavor, although it started that way in some ways and engages a broad variety of people in that way. It has massive environmental impact if you could shift just slightly what people do in relationship to food. So localizing it in Brooklyn, in an urban space, obviously we never replace upstate or the rest of the country providing food for the city, but reconnecting people and understanding the importance of their food choices and seeing things grow near them is a catalytic, a transformative understanding. And Annie Novak said it once really well. We were at a thing at WNYC together not too long ago where Annie Novak grows rooftop farms where she, in Greenpoint, it's a beautiful project. I invite you all to visit it Sundays when it's open. It's unbelievably gorgeous views for one thing. Because you look at this vegetable garden, these like $1 million views of the city. But she said people, it's called Eagle Street Rooftop Farms. It's at 44 Eagle Street in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. And she said people would come to her and say, how can you eat that lettuce when you know there's all these industrial trucks going by, the particulate waste that's dropped on that lettuce? How do you know that that's not going to kill you? The soil may be poison. And she said, these are all excellent questions. Why don't we ask the same questions of a lettuce that's packed in a plastic bag that was transported 1,500 miles from God knows where? So that's exactly why urban agriculture is important, because it reconnects you to being concerned and being excited to make that change.
And also for me, and for what we are doing it is a very small thing that you can do as an individual, but the importance of individual effort that we can all make. A lot of times that when people can't see the huge change, we get impatient, and it's hard to see what we are doing. But when we do it together, it makes it a lot easier. And do it as a community. When you empower each individual to do those small things, the small things coming together and becoming a little bit bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's really encouraging. And I think because New York is a very condensed place, those momentum can pick up much quicker than any other places, because we have more people. And environment and, you know, food and education and health and all these things, we see it as an individual problem, but when you really look at it, it's all interconnected. When you can make that clear and when you can think of it in that way, then it's starting to all make sense, because once you empower one person with all those ideas, then it grows, because they are going to be your agent to relay that to them. And I think when we look at it as not just a problem and how much impact I can make as an individual, but making impact really comes from affecting other people and talking to other people. So I like to look at it that way, and that becomes, you know, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would just like to know, how did you guys get started on this path? Or I already know you said Peace Corps.
Let's Diane, you want to say something first?
Oh,
Then we'll come back to your question.
yeah, I like the interconnectivity and the positive nature of working with food. I think too I've been reading part of this book, Last Child in the Woods, Saving Our Children from Nature Deficit Disorder. And it talks about this fourth grader in San Diego who says, I like to play indoors better because that's where all the electrical outlets are. And I think that it's not a new, I'm particularly interested in getting more kids engaged with gardening because it gets them so excited. It shows them that there are not always answers that they would have thought of, or that they can make their own discoveries in the garden, and it leads to things like cooking, and of course it's just being outdoors. I mean, there's this Let's Move campaign the First Lady's launched now includes urban agriculture as one of the ideas for preventative health care. I mean, there's not that many activities. There's a reason why in Princeton, New Jersey now gardening counts for physical education credit. I mean, this is a book that I have from 1912. I'm not going to pass it around because it's falling apart, but it's written by a guy whose mother was the director of the Bureau of School Farms for the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation. It's just, so there's nothing new under the sun here. I mean, for people who are into history, I found a 1921 guidebook that was talking about how to create synergies between school gardens and other departments or city agencies. And the sanitation department used to be called the street cleaning department. You'll like this. This guidebook said if the school gardens of the city could in some way utilize directly the selected street cleanings, it would be of the very greatest service. The matter of fertilization in New York is becoming rapidly a serious problem. There are several hundreds of horses owned by the city that would supply sufficient soil fertilization for all the school gardens and public gardens of the city. If the manure was properly composted, it would be quite worthwhile for the city to set it aside for public use, and especially for increasing the nature educational opportunities for our children. So that, you know, there may not be the same number of horses, or the horses may be medicated with dewormers that wouldn't be so good with compost these days, but there are definitely, we get into growing food here, we start to see a lot more synergies than just, you know, take this acre and plant some seeds.
Great. What was the question?
Oh no, I wanted to know how you guys started on your path. Like, how you got into it. I think
He started in the latrine in the Philippines. We got
Yeah. Yeah, he started, so.
I had a watermelon actually when I was 6 in my backyard in St. Louis, and a rabbit came and
it also, in discovering that, I've learned that people are very interested in gardening and very interested in seeing how plants grow. And I've sort of made friends with my entire block now. And they come out and they, kids are like seeing huge berries growing on the vine. And it's just, food is kind of like a catalyst for learning about all these other environmental issues. And once you get a kid or a small family to start understanding their impact or like the amount that they take from the world, they can start thinking about ways to give back. And
I'm a child of a nutritionist, and my mother worked in a diabetes specialized hospital as a nutritionist and a chef. So food was a very immediate thing for me, and our game was like when we go out to eat, we always try to guess what's in it. That's such a nerdy game, but that was the game we played as I was growing up. That's how I grew up. So food was something that was really close to me. And when I moved here, and I have 2 children, and when I started to see my family and other family and how and the school food, we started to see all these things. I just started to really question how far we came from how I grew up and how we ate. Like, we had to sit at the table. We talked about what we did during the day. And, sometimes I didn't like it. I was a teenager. I didn't want to sit at the table and eat with my parents, but I did it because that was it. But now that I realized, that really gave me a lot of information, a lot of cultural heritage, a lot of things that I've learned sitting at the table. And now children don't have that. And that partially comes from parents and children. Even the most conscientious parents have the hardest time having their kids eat what they eat, because they are so bombarded with all the information, all the advertisement with snacks and ready-made food and all these things. It's really hard. I mean, I'm a parent. I understand. It's really hard. But we have to somehow counteract that. And for kids, what works better than giving them the experience and giving them the ownership of growing food, And I know how kids react to doing their own project, and they love it. So I was like, I think that'll work. And indeed, it does work. Kids will eat the tomato they grow. They might not eat the ones from the supermarket because they don't feel connected to it. But, and then also, if we teach children, they will take it back to their home, and their parents will know something that they might not know now. So I guess I come from more of a parent's kind of point of view.
My dad was an organic farmer in West Virginia, and so he was a major dropout, and so he was very invested in this kind of alternative space, and so it got me thinking about it. He forced our whole family to be vegetarian and eat disgusting things like soybean lasagna in 1977, or I still haven't recovered from that. It's sort of like the watermelon, probably, but this made me worse, actually. But
no, I just thought, well, if the rabbits are going to eat my watermelons, I'm not going to bother.
Yes, that's a good point. If you make this lasagna, you might never bother to learn to cook or whatever. Anyways, so that got me, the consciousness of his experience kind of imbued me, and then I was involved with this is kind of an embarrassing side note, but I was involved with a anarchist vegan collective that came out of the punk rock music scene in Washington, D.C., called Positive Choice House, and that was a group of kids who were making music and not eating meat as a protest, and saw our lives as like our personal choices as an extension of our alternative lifestyle and musical choices. So I guess that's a part of the origination of this consciousness for me.
Well, I think my answer will answer the first question and this question. I came into food and gardening is because when I was a painter before, and I still disconnected with the art in some sense because it's still a luxury to be able to own paintings and things like that. And I figured that what is the best thing to interact with people, and people do the most. So people eat 3 or 5 times a day, and to have a meal is the best catalyst for conversation of anything, any topics. So I started with an I would call nature matching system, where I highlighted different grids of colors that are derived from nutrients nutrients called phytonutrients that are only on the skins of fruits and vegetables. From that particular artwork, I managed to kind of think what's next other than telling people the nutrients of the skin. The next is to find out where the food came from. That's what led to the second project is called SOS right now.
So I have a question taking up from that is that, and this is the context, I mean, we've seen you guys engage with school children, rooftops, all that, and now we're sitting here in a white box. So how do you see your work as a nexus of, with art, without getting too deep into the definitions of it, I suppose, of what art is, but how do you see yourself as artists also? I know you mentioned something about
Yeah, I mean, I also, like Tattfoo, have a painting background, and I've seen like art as a role, playing a role of helping people see the world differently, and I think all of us are trying to help, people see their food differently and possibly, see their choices differently, and for me, I'm trying to get back into this sort of sterile, like very clean place, because my work is inside a very natural, full of life. It's a relic from these pieces of relics from sort of like a habitat of insects. And I hope it sort of like pacifies a lot of what we get sort of afraid of when we think about death and decay and so. I think this sort of space is a nice contrast to sort of my perfectly crunchy garden space.
I like how you said that art is like the opportunity for people to see the world in a different way. I mean, I actually come from an art background. I do photography, and a while back I did actually have a hard time of self-expression as the sake of expressing, because I started doing art, I think, coming from more of an act of giving, and I started creating a lot of things with my hands because I didn't have money to give people gifts, and that's how I actually started doing art. I wanted to make something so I could give it to people. And when it came to the point where I could just create for the sake of creating, I just actually kind of hit the stumbling block, because then my joy wasn't there anymore. And then I realized that, my friend asked me, like, so what do you really like to do? And I just really scratched my head and said, I actually like to do things for people. I think that's what I really like to do. And then when I thought of that, and when I was thinking of a lot of things that I've been doing, I was like, because life is a creation in many different ways. And, I have people who works tirelessly and as a volunteer, and, my friend Yemi there, she's a chef and she cooks and she talks about food all the time. And Brett there, she's a graphic artist and she's an artist and she's a mom, and she does all these beautiful things for us. And then I think it's a collective of artists. We might not call ourselves as an artist group, but living beings. I feel like we all are artists. So I guess that's how I would see it.
I could answer. SOS happens outside of the gallery for 2 years, and each program is individually manifested, and people who even participate here couldn't even see the whole picture, but I did. And in a gallery workspace like this, I managed to show them all in one session. And also through the rhyme zone of network of people like here, where I got to meet Derek got to know Joanne, the exhibition director or curator of the shows, who is a foodist herself and into the food culture. Happens to understand this project and managed to invite me and have a show here. So it's also because of this show I got to invite you guys here, and you will be the ambassador to be able to go back to have this knowledge and spread the words to other people. And with press and bloggers and things like that, it will become a catalyst for our message to be louder.
I think I used to have a boss who would joke that the renderings that are being produced these days on Photoshop and other computer programs are so beautiful and exact that you don't even actually need to do the project once you've made the rendering. somebody else pointed out to me that the word image and imagination come from the same root word, and that that if you can put forth something, I mean, this is basically the same thing as these 3 paragraphs, and in a way, this on a grander level, when it manifests, is also sort of a living policy paper or a living demonstration of what growing a little bit of food and involving kids and doing it as public service to feed hungry people who don't necessarily usually get fresh food. It's all. I think there's something, like you said, we're all artists. I don't think I'm really an artist. I never took an art class since elementary school, but there's art, I think, has a certain level of uncertainty. When you start out, you don't quite know how it's gonna all come together, or even know when it's done, or discover some new things along the way. Someone signed this petition and then emailed me and said that for 10 years she's been living next to an empty lot, and now she realized when she looked at it after she signed the petition that maybe it's a place where she can start to grow food, and wanted to know what resources there were in the city that she could connect to turn that vacant lot into something else. So I think it's kind of like Christo. Was it Christo had an article in the New York Times about how he's finally been asked by the government to put together an environmental impact statement for one of his projects, and that becomes part of the art project too. So the process is interesting, to say the least.
I think for me, it comes from like 2 impulses. Like one, I started being engaged with the food movement through an art movement, through the music movement that I mentioned. But I think what's amazing about what Daniel said about an image is that art has this ability to show and not tell very complicated, interesting, engaging things that you could spend years trying to explain. And food is similar. Alice Waters said that the revolution will come from the taste of the tomato, right? So the taste and the showing are these experiential ways in which we can communicate the importance of our ideas without communicating the importance of our ideas. Like anybody who's eaten like a salad at Franny's or something like that realizes that the quality of the ingredients there is fundamentally different than the bag of lettuce that you got at Christie's, right? So I think it's, for me, also the art, bringing these kind of concepts into a gallery is really interesting too, because it's like the Marcel Duchamp notion that he brings a urinal into a gallery and suddenly the mundane becomes elevated to the sublime, right? So Tattfoo does the same kind of ideas, that he's like with black gold and with bringing dirt into a gallery, he's meditating on that he's allowing you to re-experience things that you've seen but didn't see in the same way. So he's allowing you to reconnect with that experience. Next time you see the dirt, next time you think about that empty lot, like what Daniel was saying, it'll ignite in you that you should do something. It's not that we're special and we do these things, it's that we're doing these things to ignite in everyone that we all should have that vision. And it's like what you were saying, it allows us to reconnect to each other. It's not that we care about the soil connects us to the life that we share together. And so the more that environmental consciousness develops through art and through food, that the more we have a possibility for a more connected life. I mean, that's really what I'm interested in. The people who do this work they're so full of love and joy and excitement, like Tattfoo's saying, like everybody wants to do it together, and it's a wonderful space to be in. And so the art connection is a powerful one, I think, to imagine a future that seems impossible. That's what Agnes Dennis said in '73 when she did a piece called Wheat Field, where she planted 3 acres with wheat where now stands Battery Park City Park, where it was an empty lot. And she said, what artists do is take a paradox and make it real. And so urban agriculture is itself an oxymoron, right? Because it's juxtaposing 2 landscapes that are thought to be opposed, but artists see that they could live together, and it's that imaginative possibility for a better future that unifies the art movement and the food movement right now.
I think there's a component to the question the gentleman asked, which I haven't heard anybody address in the work coming into a white cube, which is its commercial potential, which I know has two contexts, right? Which would be what you call the crunchy, farm world, and then also, if this is indeed going to become more of an art movement, then within that white cube, how is this going to get commercialized, and how do you use what politics, what political framework do you come up for yourself, for the resources that you make or don't make, how do you fund it? I'm wondering if any of you have run into this, or would you decline? I mean, it sounds like, I'm sorry to
Derek.
Derek. It sounds like Derek, you might have a good sense of when you would refuse to sell a piece to someone, if that's like an abstraction of what I'm talking about.
I think we're in a really confused moment about what commerce is. So many people in this space are so generous, like you were saying. We deal in a marketplace of ideas where we freely give them away, and the internet has really exposed that generosity in human beings. Like, how many times do you go to CNET and there's 50 people who say what's good about some camera, and you're like, why the hell would you do this? This is incredible. I don't even know how to interpret all these things that you've given. So we're in this moment where we're inherently generous, but we're in this economy that requires us to be selfish about things we don't care about. And so I think that that's a really interesting question. I think there's always a negotiation about how money will enter into the equation, and how to make a living doing what your passion is, which is connecting, I think, a little bit with what you're saying, like, do I sell this work? And of course, all of us are engaged in some ways in selling our services, our work, our ideas, but trying to do it in a way that is not replicating the mistakes of the extractive, petroleum-based, exploitive economy, which is basically collapsing before our eyes. Slowly but surely, it's collapsing. And so I'm part of a movement called, I recommend to all of you a book which is more a work of poetry than a real financial analysis, but there's a book called Slow Money by Woody Tash, where he analyzes the moment that we're in where our economic ways of thinking are really broken. And I think could be a powerful way to reconceptualize how to approach art making and art money making and art commerce in the same way that he's trying to imagine reimagining investing in agriculture as being investing in the soil in the future rather than investing in a spike return that we all anticipate. So there's a lot of thinking being done about it. I'm not the smartest person to evaluate that sentiment that you've raised, but it's an exploration that's key to all of this, actually. So
I think one thing, sort of to the white box, but to the ownership of things. The white box, I think through artistry or any approach that we have, there often can be no wrong space when you have the opportunity to have a space, which is sort of what urban agriculture says. What about that little plot in front of my house that just was grass? And there's not a wrong space when we need more green things so much. And yet the whole challenge of we live in a society where we need to earn a living is sort of a fundamental challenge, because it doesn't make sense. And I think in a holistic world there would be a different kind of exchange system, and we don't have to have the bottom dollar. We have to have everybody fed. And you were talking about a lot of good books. So there's one that Herland that was written in 1911 by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Some people know she wrote The Yellow Wallpaper. It's sort of a well-known book in the feminist world. But Herland is a fantasy of what a world could look like in a different paradigm, and it talks about sort of everything that grows matters and sustains the people, and they even like plan how many people can be on that land in order for it to be sustained for generations coming. But that's off topic in terms of what I want to say, because I'm curious if we're prepared for the fight, because it's a fight to plant at City Hall, and it's a fight to teach our kids to eat good food. But Monsanto is trying to own the seeds. And it really could be a fight to plant our own gardens. So in a way, the movement is extremely, extremely political. And people don't know that yet, and that's fine, because it can grow in a non-political environment. It's this way to teach everybody to get their hands dirty and work in the garden. But it's going to be extremely political to have seeds for free. And for them not to be genetically modified and not to be structured in a way where you can't just exchange. And I think that that's sort of like part of the ownership question. Okay, you know what? Tattfoo got some space for a few weeks. Let's use it. And because there'll be a time where we can't even have, or no, I fear there may be a time when we can't even have a free conversation without somebody listening in on it through our iPods or something.
I think that's a really relevant point, and I think there's a lot of, visible and invisible fight, what you would call, is happening. But in Japan, we say, if you wanna get there sooner, take the long way. I think making friends and talking about these issues today will have a bigger effect later on. And I feel that it is a fight, and it is something that currency is going to be a big issue. But we do live in a capitalist world, and I think there is, because we don't live in communist world or any other system of living, I think we can use currency to actually affect people. And then when there are a number of people who would purchase or who would value, say, what we believe in, the more people, the better. And I feel that because we live in a capitalist world, that we should come up with a way we can actually use that to take the upper hand to create a change, instead of seeing that as just one set of way of thinking that's the way that it's going to fall. That's the reason it's falling now, but that doesn't mean that's the only reason that it's going to fall. And I think that we can use to make a change. I mean, I kind of am idealistic, but I think it can happen.
I was wondering, Daniel mentioned policy and trying to go along with this conversation also. Have you guys, in doing this work, have you thought about the topic you were touching on, soil quality? Have you been approached, or have you thought about it from the aspect of contributing to statistics and policy and research about any of these areas, like composting, and how it would contribute to further maybe policy decisions? Or have you looked at work in that context at all, as having the potential to give information that could possibly further?
Think of it indirectly. I mean, certain things like carbon sequestration, people want to maybe buy carbon offsets for Brazil, for the rainforests, or who knows what, but you can actually work with kids and demonstrate how much carbon is being sequestered or taken up at a plant, and get them to understand that, so that when they end up in a policy class, they